Hello, and welcome to the Daily Rings of Power podcast, your daily dose of the latest news, rumours, and speculation about the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. The day is Wednesday, September 14th, and I'm your host, Harry. I hope you're having a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. It's been a long week's wait, but we're back with our review and in-depth breakdown of Episode 3 of The Rings of Power, Adar. I want to apologise that I didn't get my spoiler review out last weekend. The new episode dropping coincided with, well, my own birthday celebrations, and I unfortunately didn't have time to record. However, just like last week, I am joined once again by Anna, my LSR, to break down all the juicy details, theorise, and have a wider discussion about the episode. Hopefully, our extra long breakdown will be compensation enough for missing out on the review. We also took plenty of questions from listeners on Twitter, so stick around to hear some of our off-the-cuff answers and speculation. But as always, we begin today's episode with a reading from the Professor's work. Today's reading comes from the Silmarillion, the Akalabeth. A land was made for the Edain to dwell in, neither part of Middle-earth nor of Valinor, for it was sundered from either by a wide sea, yet it was nearer to Valinor. It was raised by Osse out of the depths of the great water, and it was established by Aule and enriched by Yavanna, and the Eldar brought thither flowers and fountains out of Toloressia. That land the Valar called Andor, the land of gift, and the star of Eärendil shone bright in the west, as a token that all was made ready and as a guide over the sea. And men marvelled to see that silver flame in the paths of the sun. Then the Edain set sail upon the deep waters following the star, and the Valar laid a peace upon the sea for many days, and sent sunlight and a sailing wind, so that the waters glittered before the eyes of the Edain like rippling glass, and the foam flew like snow before the stems of their ships. But so bright was Rothinzil that even at morning men could see it glimmering in the west, and in the cloudless night it shone alone, for no other star could stand beside it. And setting their course towards it, the Edain came at last over leagues of sea, and saw afar the land that was prepared for them, Andor, the land of gift, shimmering in a golden haze. Then they went up out of the sea, and found a country fair and fruitful, and they were glad. And they called that land Alena, which is starwards, but also Anadune, which is westerness, Numenore, in the high Eldarin tongue. Seeing as we got our first look at Numenor on this week's episode, it felt only right to return to Tolkien's description of the men of the First Age journeying there. Just like last week, we're going to separate our breakdown into the various storylines for Episode 3. We'll heap praise where we thought the show excelled, but also offer our critiques where we felt things were lacking. And at the end, we'll answer listener questions, as well as speculate on where we think Episode 4 will go. Now, I won't waste any more time, and we'll dive into our discussion with Anna. So, without further ado, I once again, now a regular feature, I'm welcoming back to the show for our episode discussion, Anna, my LSR from Twitter. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on again. I feel like I'll probably stop saying this at some point because it's definitely going to be a regular thing.
Exactly, yeah. We got a nice bit of gentle bullying on Twitter for you to come back on, and, you know, I like to think this is the fun experience for both of us, so hopefully you're not going to drop out after this one. But I guess it depends how much we have to talk about Halbrand. That might tip you over the edge.
Yeah, that's my breaking point, I think. That's where I'll snap.
Okay, we'll limit the Halbrand talking. Well, we're not going to waste any time today because we know how the format goes. Anna and I are going to talk about our general thoughts for the episode, then break down some of the key storylines and characters. Then at the end of the episode, we'll rate the episode and talk about our expectations for Episode 4. So with that in mind, Anna, give us your overall thoughts on Episode 3, Adar.
So this episode was definitely my favourite out of the three. I loved them all, obviously, but this one is the one that I felt the most invested in. Like, I loved it from the start, but this is where I really felt hooked in. You know, I was like, okay, I'm in this for like the long run. I need to, like, I'm just completely invested. I thought the storylines were all really well done. There was not one that I was bored by. And coming into this, I was kind of, rank how much I wanted to talk about each storyline, but I couldn't because there's so much to say about every single one of them. I did feel a bit of a void because we'd got so used to seeing, Elrond, Disa, Durin. It felt, I'm not going to say empty without them because obviously I still enjoyed the episode, but it will be good to see them again in the future. And I do appreciate that they didn't kind of shove everyone into one episode. It felt a lot better paced. That was definitely one of my main concerns with the first two episodes, the pacing, and I think they kind of fell into more even footing with this episode. It's still not perfect, but it's definitely a lot better than it was. And of course, my favorite character came in this episode, and I was absolutely not disappointed by him at all. I was not disappointed by anything in Numenor, which was my main. I think one of my main fears for this episode was that Numenor was just going to be kind of a letdown, and it wasn't. It was just magnificent. I just really enjoyed it. You know, the darker look into the Hartfoot culture, Arondir and the orcs was such an interesting plotline, and I loved seeing more of the orcs because they are incredibly well designed and acted. Yeah, it was just overall my favorite episode so far. I really enjoyed it.
Well, that is good news to hear. I mean, I'm as you said, I'm not surprised that Numenor has got you very happy, given who's involved there. Also, I agree. I think Numenor was kind of they didn't miss a step there from the depiction of the city to the interactions between Elendil and his family, Miriel, Farazon, all of it. It all felt very much to me like it was coming off the page onto the screen. I mean, I won't spend too much time to talk about my overall thoughts. I was on the Fellowship of Fans watch party stream last night, and if you want to hear some of my more general thoughts, that's available there. But I'll say that I agree. I thought it was very strong. I'll save my thoughts for the end on where I think this ranks among the three episodes, but I would also like to piggyback off what you were saying about the absence of Elrond and the dwarves. I think what's interesting was that in some ways this was a much darker episode, which we know the Second Age stories are going to be darker, and I think, the Harfoots didn't have many moments of levity in their scenes. We didn't have the dwarves, which are not there for comic relief, but they have this very vibrant energy, and so the light-hearted moments were fewer and far between, so I think people really appreciated that. And I've seen from Twitter that a lot of book readers have said this is their favourite episode as well, because I think it's getting to the core of some of the more central parts of Tolkien's Second Age writings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, now that we've talked about our overall thoughts, I think we have to start talking about the characters. And I just want to clue the listeners into a bit of behind-the-scenes production detail for the podcast. Before Anna and I started recording today, I said, Anna, send me across your notes, what you want to talk about today. And the first bullet point didn't just say Elendil, it said Elendil and Lloyd Owen. So I don't think I need to give any more of an intro than that. Anna, why don't you talk to us about, how is Elendil? How is Lloyd Owen? Very disappointing, I imagine.
How is he? I mean, I'm going to have to stop myself because I could talk about this for hours. I mean, I feel like anyone who knows me on Twitter or follows me knows that he was the one who I was most excited for. I think it was excitement and nerves, but not so much because I knew from the moment we saw him in the trailers that he was going to be incredible. I don't know how. Maybe it was just blind faith, but I was like, yes, he's going to be amazing. And he definitely didn't disappoint. I think I've said this before, and you can see it most in Elendil. He's got such an important role, but at the same time, there's so much that we don't know about him. And Lloyd Owen completely brought that like subtlety to his character where he seems kind of like, oh, he's a sea captain, he found the main characters, he brought them in, but there's so much going on behind the scenes, and I think that really plays out out a lot in his family dynamics, which is one of the moments I really appreciated the most when they're all sat around the table, talking about Isildur and all of this stuff. I mean, a lot of people's main takeaway, and I don't blame them at all, is, the Elendil aspect, which the writers of the show now know about, which is
Hmm.
slightly embarrassing, but they seem happy that he's getting recognition.
Yeah, and I mean, when you say a lot of people's takeaway is how hot Elendil is, it feels like you're really trying to separate yourself from that group. Whereas anyone who followed you on Twitter at the weekend, I don't know how many tweets you sent about Elendil, but it might have been in the double digits within like 24 hours of the show airing.
Yeah, if we include my private Twitter as well, which we won't go too much into because it's private for a reason. It's just it was a lot because there was so much riding on his character for me. He was like the
Mm,
one that I wanted to be great. And even though that I never had much doubt, there was kind of this nervousness when he walked towards them on the ship. I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do if I don't like him. He's like the one I've hyped up the most. And I
mm,
always say that I try to keep my expectations for things low as much as I can because I don't like being disappointed. But he didn't disappoint me. So many things he said already that are kind of stuck in my head. So many
mm,
quotes, and not just because of his voice and the way he says them, just so many things already that I want to pick apart about his
yeah.
character. And I mean, I can't believe we've got him for like what 5 seasons to come. And we're gonna see so much from him. And I feel like we've already got such a deep dive in the first episode alone.
Mm.
It's crazy how much more we're gonna get from him. And his conversation with Muriel about his name is one of my favorite moments that we've had in the show so far.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, I'd echo all your thoughts. I think Lloyd Owen in one episode has already, met my expectations. Which, as you said, I think my expectations were equally high. I was very reassured leading up to the show that Lloyd Owen is clearly very invested in the character, and he's also invested in Tolkien's
Absolutely.
writing about him. But every scene he was in, I thought were the strongest scenes in that episode, and it was a
Yeah.
very strong episode, as we've said, and some very intense sequences. But what's interesting to me is that most of his scenes were dialogue. They weren't action. They weren't intense in any way. They had an emotional intensity, but they weren't like the Harfoots or Arondir and the Orcs. And I think he just brought a level of gravitas and like he was actually coming out of the world. The character didn't feel written; he felt real. But yeah, let's dive in first to that aspect of his character. And when I say that aspect, I'm referencing the point you raised about his conversation with Miriel about his name. But I think we can more broadly talk about, where is Elendil within the culture of Numenor, right? Because in the books, all we know is that he becomes, a leader of the faithful through his father, basically, and later leads those faithful exiles to Middle Earth. But we don't really know what led up to that point for him. And so I don't know what your thoughts are on how the show's portraying that and what we learned from that scene with him and Miriel in the throne room.
Well, I know we spoke last time. We were wondering about how they were gonna explain his name or if they were gonna bring it up at all, and then they just went straight in with what does it mean? But I really appreciated that conversation because it felt there were a lot of moments in this episode that I think felt just like Tolkien. The two of them like stood there in this tense moment with this beautiful background, and they're unpicking what his name means and what that says about their political standings. It just felt
Mm,
so, and it wasn't this big tense action scene with like music behind. It was quiet, and it was just the two characters talking, but like I said about him, he brings this subtlety, and it could come across to viewers as kind of a stoicness, because
mm,
that's how a lot of his lines were kind of delivered. But there's just that undertone, especially in that conversation of conflict and tension, because they were both kind of trying to figure out what the other one was thinking, where the other one was standing through their words and through their glances. And it was such subtle, nuanced writing and acting that it felt so real, like you said. There was just such a grounded nature about it, which is something I really appreciated. And I think the faithful storyline, I think it's going to have a lot to do with his family, and that's where his daughter might come in. And I think,
mm,
she's shown these signs of distrust towards Galadriel, so I don't know if it's going to end up being, faithful versus family, and that might
yeah.
be the dynamic it ends up being.
Yeah, I think I talked about this a little bit on last night's stream, and what I think about it is if you look at the way the story of the Second Age is told by Tolkien, it's a historical recounting of events. It's not a novel, it's not, we don't get characters' inner thoughts, we don't even really get much dialogue. So, how do you explore this idea of Númenóreans wrestling with their mortality, wrestling with their allegiance to the Eldar and the Valar? How do you deal with that? And I think what the show is doing very cleverly is it's making it personal, as you said. It's about family. Now, we know from interviews that Lloyd Owen and other cast have done before the show that within the show's time, Elendil has recently lost his wife. She's died. So he's a widow. And because of that, what was very clear to me in those scenes between Elendil and Isildur and Eärien was that he is very much struggling with his own faith. You know, he doesn't really know how he can balance his faith in the Valar, his faith in the gift of Ilúvatar, that being the kind of mortal grace of men, versus the fact that Númenor is clearly at a point in time where the faithful are shunned from high society, so to speak, and from the royal court at a time where distrust of the elves is an all-time high. And he desperately, I think, wants to do two things. On the one hand, he wants to protect his family and see that they have a good future, hence his whole exchange with Isildur about, you know, I tried to get you into the Queen's Guard, then you had a fire, I tried to get you into the cavalry, and you failed that. And similarly with Eärien about her getting into the Builders Guild. All of this is Elendil trying to protect his family, and maybe we can talk about Eärien a bit after, but you even heard it in that his disagreement with his second son clearly came about because Anarion doesn't want to give up on the cultural ties to the faithful in the west of Númenor, whereas he is, I mean, maybe he's just being pragmatic, but I also mentioned last night, maybe his faith is shaken. Yes, we know in future he's going to be the leader of the faithful, but maybe right in this moment, dealing with a much more intimate form of mortality, that of his wife's death, maybe it has shaken his faith. Because I feel like that's something we can all relate to in our own lives. You know, if you have faith or if you're spiritual and, you know, you might believe that, you know, everything is according to, you know, a higher power's plan. When you lose a loved one, even for the most devout, that can really shake their faith. So I think it's really interesting that, and I don't know how much the show's going to get into that, but I think they've definitely kind of planted the seeds.
Yeah, I do like the idea that they're not kind of portraying him as this one track mind, he has complete trust in the Vala kind of thing, because I guess, especially if we're seeing it play out over a lot of episodes, a lot of seasons, it could get boring fast because there's not really a story to tell there. It's this is what he thinks, this is what he wants to do, he's going to do it. You know, they kind of need to put obstacles in his way. They need a reason for him to strive to end up there. And the thing about someone being faithful is a lot of the time it's not blind faith. You need something to make you want to be faithful. And I think that's what he might be searching for. And at this point, it's not clear whether he's found it yet.
Yeah, and you know, there's a passage from the Silmarillion that I always go back to, not to be the guy that always tries to quote the
Yeah, just
Silmarillion.
name dropping the Silmarillion again.
I know, what a nerd, what a book nerd. But there's a line in the Silmarillion in the chapter of the Coming of Men, and it talks about the fact that the Valar Ulmo, who's basically the god of the seas, tries to speak to the men through the waters. So in Middle-earth, he tries to speak to them through the streams and the rivers and the springs. And what Tolkien effectively says in that passage, he says, you know, Ulmo spoke to them, but they could not understand it. And a big thing that I think, hopefully they're going to do a good job of, but for anyone listening who hasn't read the books, there is a key distinction between elves and men. And it's not just about mortality. Elves are not only aware that the Valar exist, a lot of them have interacted with the Valar. Many of them lived in Valinor. Many had interactions with them at the end of the First Age during the War of Wrath. It's not a question of faith for them. It is a reality. It is a fixed fact. Whereas for men, they are told that they exist, but there aren't any men living by the late Second Age, because the last time they would have interacted with the Valar is at the end of the First Age, and when Númenor was first, created out of the sea by Ose, one of the Mire of Ulmo. they haven't interacted with the Valar for, who knows, maybe 1,000 years, 2,000 years. So there's no one alive in Numenor who can see that they exist. And in the same way that in human culture, in our real world, in the primary world, people often talk about the fact, well, a lot of these prophets were around 2,000 years ago. Well, 2,000 years later, if you've seen no evidence of the gods, what does that do to your faith? So it's really interesting to me that I think some people thought the show wasn't going to get into this deep level of kind of, Tolkien's metaphysics. But for me, it's so interesting that they've given that to Elendil because, like you say, there's a risk he could be a very one-track, good, heroic, boring character. And I think much like Peter Jackson made Aragorn a more complex character in the films, same thing.
And yeah, it's not to say that we don't appreciate the characters as they are, because I love rereading the books and rediscovering Aragorn's character there. But there is just an added element to him in the films that I really appreciate, this kind of grappling with his own, in a way, it's faith as well, like faith in the crown and faith in himself and his ancestors, which is going to be really interesting to see Elendil do it.
Yeah.
That's, I think, what I'm most excited for in this show,
Yeah.
obviously because it's just him, but the way his character progresses is interesting, kind of nerve wracking, but I think if they do it well, he could be really, really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And to kind of continue our conversation and maybe finish our portion on the House of Elendil, let's talk. I know in particular you wanted to talk about Eärien, but we can also talk about Isildur and the name dropped but yet not seen Anarion. So talk to me about, we got maybe really one full scene with Eärien. We got a brief exchange between her and Isildur at the beach. I know she was a character that you were kind of coming into the series. I remember when we did our pre-season show, you said, well, listen, it's not that I've got a problem with her, but I need a reason to care and I need reasons to be interested in a character. How do you feel about Eärien after kind of one full scene with her?
I still don't feel like I have a reason to care yet, but I feel like we're getting one, and I can kind of see how it's going to build up to one. I know a lot of people who I spoke to were worried that her getting accepted into the Builders Guild was going to be a way to, she comes in, she bridges this conversation between Isildur and Elendil, she gets into the Builders Guild, and she's gone. We don't need her anymore, which
Mm,
is one of the things I was worried about, is for them to add this female character in just to bridge the gap between Elendil and Isildur, because there were other ways they could do that. They wouldn't,
mm,
I don't think they had to create a character just for that. I know a lot of people have theorized that she is going to build something, and I think that's really interesting in itself, because there is obviously two ways that could go. She could build something like the temple, or she could end up building something like the Argonath, Minas Tirith. People have theorized stuff like that. I don't know how that would fit into the timeline, but if it's going to be that compressed, then who knows? I think she has a lot of potential at the moment, which I didn't see before coming into it. So she's definitely gone up in my ranks.
yeah.
But I am excited to see how that plays out, and I kind of hope she goes down a darker path in the Numenorian culture, because I think that will also impact Elendil's story a lot, like this faithful versus family. Because if Eärien isn't faithful, that's going to kind of put this big obstacle in his way, because that's
Mm.
his family that he has to kind of fight against.
Yeah. No, to be honest, I completely agree with what you said. And while I might be biased because I think I have the same relationship with Eärien that you have with Elendil, where I'm just like, oh, they're so pretty. I'm really just very distracted by that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But what I do think is interesting is that I think exactly as you said, it's about bridging that gap. It's about adding an extra layer of personal conflict for Elendil. But I think it's also going to be our point of view into the Kingsmen, because Pharazon's obviously going to be our antagonist, who is going to be leading the King's Men, and later is obviously going to seek to advance himself in his position. But Aarion is probably going to give us that cultural and that personal insight. You know, her conversations with whether it's Pharazon or Pharazon's as yet unseen son Kemen. That's how we're going to get that inside track and understand what motivates the King's Men and their culture. And so I do think she's a very interesting character. Personally, if you were to ask me where I think she's going, I think if you introduce a character who wants to be an architect and a builder, and given that we later know, and I'm not going to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't read the books, but later in Numenor's time in this show, a very important building is going to get built in Numenor, and one that has very negative repercussions. I would, if I could go to the bookies now and place a bet on Earion's name being written on the architect's plans of that building, I think I'd have a reasonably safe bet. Although, as when I did my special on Numenor with Lesbians for Boromir, I will say if they want to make Earion the Witch Queen, then I'm all on board for that as well. Controversial take, but I would like it.
Yeah, Witch Queen, probably not for me, but I'm definitely on board her having a dark storyline,
Yeah.
very dark.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it would be quite unexpected because she just looks so normal, and I know that sounds strange, but when you think of Tolkien, you think of these villainous
Mm.
villains, and that's not always it because we're going to experience this a lot, especially if we get Sauron in his form as Anatar.
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
knows? I have no idea what they're doing with that storyline, but
Yeah.
it will be exciting to see these villains who it's like Grima, he's a manipulative, he's a really interesting villain, but you look at him and you're like, he's bad, you know?
Mm. Definitely.
Don't trust him. Why would you trust him? And then
Yeah.
you see someone like Aryan who's telling you to she gives you these plans and she's like, build this for me, and you're like, oh, of course, you're so
Yeah.
nice.
And
I'll
she's
do
so
that.
tiny and pocket-sized as well. You know, you could just she's a little portable Numenorian. I love it. So I don't know that there's that much to say on Isildur because I think we've already kind of covered this idea that he's trying to find his identity. He's clearly grieving the loss of his mother. You know, his conversation with Elendil about, has the sea healed your hurts, when Elendil tells him that the sea's going to do the same for him. But I did want to get your take on one particular scene, which is his very introductory scene where he's standing on the ship, he looks out to sea, and he hears a voice whispering his name. I have an idea of what I think that voice represents, but what was your takeaway from that?
I was kind of confused at first because I was like, are they gonna go down this line? I was like, okay, they are. And I don't know really what to make of it. I wasn't expecting something like that right when he was introduced.
Mm,
But props to them for kind of setting his story up instantly.
yeah.
I honestly don't know if it's theories you're
Okay.
looking for. I'm not your girl, so I want to know
Yeah.
what you think.
Okay. My theory is that it represents two things. One, it's the call of the sea itself, and this idea that whatever Isildur may think, he deep down knows that his fate is to go out to sea, and as we know in a very literal way, that is where his journey takes him. But my first thought was, oh, I think that's him hearing his mother's voice, because as we
Mm.
see later in the episode, he is still clearly very much struggling with that loss of his mother, and so because it was a feminine voice, I think, that was whispering to him,
Yeah.
my interpretation was that that was his mother. But again, we don't have much evidence one way or the other. I think seeing as we've got a little bit more to talk about with Numenor, let's talk about not Queen Miriel, not Tar Miriel, but Queen Regent Miriel in the show. So, we've really only had two scenes with her, I would say, two proper scenes. What's your read on her character so far? What did you think about Cynthia Adai Robinson's portrayal? Where are you at with that character after, admittedly, very little screen time?
I think I feel the same about her as I do about Lloyd, and that the best thing about them as their characters was the subtlety that they brought. Because I think there was a chance, like a very big chance, that her character could be played kind of over the top, and I think that would ruin it for me. A lot of what she said or showed was through minimal words and a lot of looks, which I really appreciated. You know, you could see a lot through her eyes and through her demeanor around people. From just the moment she turned around, I think her and Farazan had quite lasting impressions on me. Her kind of glance to the side and the way her face subtly changed as Galadriel walks in, and then you had Farazan, who his stature was so hulking, and he just turned around with this eyebrow raise, and it really stuck with me. So I
Mm,
think a lot of acting is this kind of subtle physical acting so far, which I really am enjoying, and I think it says a lot about the characters without having to say a lot about the characters. I think she's brilliant in the role, and I did get a lot of people under my tweets. I was talking about her for a bit, and a lot of people were like, "I hate Muriel. She's rude. She was rude to Galadriel. She was rude to Elendil. You know, what's her problem?"
mm,
And it's like, I get that she could seem standoffish, but that's the same argument a lot of people had about Galadriel this episode. And it's like you have to look at what they're seeing, and she's playing Muriel in a time when an elf on the shores of Numenor is just unheard of, and she's kind of got to face this by herself. It was her at the top of the steps and Galadriel and Halbrand at the bottom, and you could just feel so much from her, but she said so little, and she was just so commanding, and
mm.
I loved her in the role. I think she's amazing. And the part at the
Yeah.
end, I think it was only about a minute, the scene, and she says, you know, "It's here, father, the elf has arrived," or something like that. It's such a
Mm.
short scene, but I was like, oh my gosh, don't end it there. Just give me something more,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the word I came away with from Cynthia's portrayal of the character was regal. You know, like you
Absolutely.
said, authoritative. You know, she felt like a ruler in every scene. And sometimes when you watch TV shows and someone's playing a monarch, whether it's a king or queen, it feels like they're acting like a
Yeah.
monarch rather than just being one. And Miriel just came across to me like she doesn't look at anyone else. You know, when she looks at Farazon, it's because she's basically telling him, handle this, make the decision. But she was controlling almost the tenor of the room
Yeah.
with her voice and with her actions. I think a couple of things I want to know about, you know, some one of our questions on Twitter, and we're going to try and answer a few of the questions during mine and Anna's discussion now, and then if we don't get to any, I'm going to answer some extra ones at the end. But someone asked, what did I think about Miriel's, how they're portraying Miriel's character, and I saw some people saying like, oh, isn't it weird that Miriel doesn't know Elendil's name? Like, that's not how I read that scene at all. And the very clear way you know that's not the reading of that scene is that when he says, "Oh, my name means one who loves the stars," she's like, "I think you'll find it has a second meaning, doesn't it, Elendil?" And that is how you know that Miriel is a calculated political practitioner. She is keeping the information she wants to herself. She's not giving away more than she needs to, both with Elendil, Galadriel, Farazon, because of course she could say to Galadriel, you know, I have a prophecy about you. She could say to Farazon, you know, oh, I know who Elendil is, or I've heard of him at least. It's difficult to tell in the show exactly how they're portraying Elendil's nobility in terms of his father. But regardless, what I really loved is every scene we got her in, we found that she was playing a different political game. In the court, she was appearing imperious and regal and keeping her people trusting her. When she was with Elendil, she was testing him. And I think she wasn't testing him to be like, oh, if you're a faithful, then I'm going to have your head cut off. It was, I'm trying to work out if you're faithful so I can trust you to look after Galadriel without, you know, getting into a scrap with her or pissing her off or whatever it might be. And then separately, obviously, we saw with her father. You know, I have a strong suspicion that her father basically told her, you know, you've got to let this coup happen. Maybe he even said that, you know, you should be the one leading this coup against me, because he realized his political position as king was untenable. And so they clearly are still working together behind the scenes. So I think it's just really fascinating the way they're portraying her, not as in the books where, you know, she is meant to inherit the scepter of Numenor, the queenship, and Farazon just takes it from her by force, basically. They're portraying her as a much more aware, much more political animal, and I love that. That's great for me.
Yeah, I feel like you can, in every scene she's in, you can kind of see her playing a chess game in her head where she's just so calculated in everything she does, in every look that she gives people, every movement she makes. And it's like you said, the scene with her and Elendil, you can read that as a surface level. She is interrogating him. And I rewatched the episode with my brother, which was quite fun. And it actually made me feel very
Mm,
smart because he doesn't know much outside of the original films. I see when I'm talking to people like you and, Tolkien scholars on the internet, I'm at a loss for a lot of the knowledge, but I was like flexing in front of my brother. I was like, oh yeah, this is a seal door, this is a Lendil. And he was like, wow, no, really? He was in the films? I was like, I know, it's crazy, right? Um, and he was kind of scrolling through his phone during the scene with Muriel and Elendil, which was, I don't blame
mm,
him. If he doesn't have the biggest interest in this, he's going to see two people talking and kind of just go, okay. But it got to the part where where he's handed this sword, and he looks up at me and he goes, he's going to kill Galadriel. And I was like, no, listen. So I do, yeah, I can see why it was taken that way by some people, but I think the way they're doing it is really masterful. And I'm
mm,
excited to see the relationship develop between the two because obviously they're still at a point where they don't quite know if they can trust each other or not. And I'm excited to see that
mm.
develop. But I'm also very nervous to see how they handle the Farazan plot because, like you said, she's so much more
Yes.
aware than she is in the books. And I don't know if they're going to keep going down he takes her as his bride and he takes this role by force or how they're going to handle this.
Yeah, I mean, I've said many times before the show aired, and I'll keep saying it until I get, until I get disappointed. My number one ask of this show is do not do the forced marriage plot.
Yeah,
It is a tired trope having a female ruler lose her power through physical or often gendered violence, and in this case, it would be a form of sexual violence as well. And I
absolutely.
just don't think the show needs to do that. I don't think it's necessary. I think they're setting up Miriel to be a much more complicated character. Now, for those who haven't read, and this may not even be aware to people who've only read the Silmarillion, there are versions of Miriel that Tolkien wrote where she does fall in love with Pharazôn and marries him by choice. Now, I'm not saying they're going to do that because canonically they're first cousins, so and that is part of the horror. To be fair to Tolkien, when he does that with Miriel and Pharazôn in Silmarillion, that is a point that Pharazôn is desecrating the laws of society by marrying his first cousin. So I'm not sure they're going to do that, but they do have leeway to explore a slightly different dynamic. And my suspicion, and I said this, a few weeks before the show aired, my suspicion is the bigger issue is going to be, as we've seen from the trailers, Miriel is going to go to Middle Earth at some point this season with the Force, with Galadriel, and I think she might think she's doing the right thing, but I think leaving Pharazôn in charge while she's away. I'm not saying she'll come back and he will have already taken the scepter and the throne, but he might be in a position where when she comes back, the balance of power has just ever slightly tilted. And as Pharazôn said to her, the first snowflake can cause an avalanche, and I think she might find that in her own space. I don't want us to talk too much in Pharazôn about this episode because I think we're going to find out much more about him
Yeah.
next episode 5. So maybe let's save that for next week. But what we have to talk about before we finish with Numenor, and followers of Anna, people who listened to the last episode know Anna's been a Halbrand hater since day one. She's made no secret of it. But I'd like to give Anna the chance now because, the further we get into the season, the harder it is going to be to walk back. Are you warming up to Halbrand after this episode?
I thought I was for one moment,
Oh no.
and I was so happy. I was like, this is it. He's going to change my mind immediately. No. And
What was the
this
moment?
is the thing. I don't want this to come across as that I dislike his actor because I think his actor's doing a fabulous job with the role he has, but it's just the
Mm,
character that I dislike. And props to the actor because he's doing it so well. that my hatred is like passionate. And there were two scenes I think where I almost warmed up to him because I liked the way he was written in those moments. And it was actually, I guess it would technically be one scene because they were both parts of the same scene. But this moment where he's sat in Numenor and he's just by himself and he's approached by all these other men who have a go at him, basically, not to sound really British, but he just stares into space and it gets quiet and you're like, okay, this is it. He's gonna beat everyone up, and then he doesn't, and he laughs, and I was like, okay, I wasn't expecting that. I like the way they took that in, like the direction they took that in. And then he goes, he has a fight with them. It was whatever, but then I think my problem with Halbrand, and this is just a very personal problem, is that they're trying too hard to make him this snarky, raggedy brunette love interest character. And they're trying so hard that every time they try and hit one of the marks, it never makes the landing for me. And there was one point where I visibly rolled my eyes in the episode.
Oh no.
And it was the moment when they walk into the throne room and he goes, kneel. Muriel's like, you don't kneel in Numenor. And he's like, sorry. I just went, oh, come on, please. I was
I
like, I
like
can't. I hated it. I hated it.
I liked it. I was like, he thinks he knows what he's talking about because he's like walking the throne with Galadriel, like, listen, let's just try not to make any enemies. Follow my lead. And then the first thing he does, like, it's very clear he's out of place. Okay, I completely hear what you're saying. I think this might be, for the Britwit podcast, I think this might be our first disagreement. I was the same as you. I think we talked about it on episode 2. I really didn't feel anything towards him in episode 2. But I'll tell you what I really like. I really like that this character has a duality to him. And what I mean by that is that there is a real darkness in him. And we saw that in 2 moments. First, when the Numenorians in the kind of market or, food court area, I don't know what to call it, were bothering him. And he just gets this glassy-eyed stare, almost Patrick Bateman, American Psycho. And you see this darkness building, and it's almost like watching someone bend a ruler, and you're waiting for it to snap. And then he lets go, and the tension goes, and he realizes he has to play it careful. But then he has that outpouring of violence. But what I really like, and what I mean by this duality, is later when he's in the cell, and Galadriel's talking to him about, you have this, lineage, you have this responsibility, and you could do some good. There's this great moment where the camera goes level with him, and he's not quite looking into camera, but he's only partially lit by light on one side. But he has, and I've said this on Twitter, I said it on the stream last night, Charlie Vickers portrayed such sadness behind the eyes, and I obviously don't know what the cause of Halbrand's sadness is, because we don't know about his character yet. But there's a great deal of sadness there, and I like that his character, I've heard some comparisons to kind of film Aragorn in that he's a king who's not sure about his destiny. I don't read him that way at all, really. I think he's an antithesis to Aragorn in many ways. But I think what's interesting is that he is someone who the show is able to explore the darkness of men, and that being the violence, the legacy of men who fell to darkness, while also someone who is not a mustache-twirling villain. He is flawed, and I think he's the most morally grey character we've had in a Lord of the Rings adaptation. So that's why I like it, because I love morally grey characters.
Yeah.
That's why I like the way they're portraying Galadriel. It's why I like the way they've portrayed a lot of characters. So I like that moral greyness, but I do also know what you mean that I do know what you mean that some of his moments aren't landing, and I think, like I've said this on Twitter, I don't think they're actually trying to push the romantic interest angle. I think we're all just seeing the chemistry that Mordovith Clark and Charlie Vickers have, and yes, okay, some of the camera choices you could argue were meant to. Now people can't see this at home, but Anna's giving me just the most horrible look as I said they're not doing it on purpose. But I don't think they're overdoing it. I think they're letting it play out.
Yeah. See,
But that's okay. Let him have a bit of tension. Let him have.
I agree with you in the sense that there is this darkness in him, and I think, see, I dislike him at the moment, but he's not completely lost on me. where I've only
Mm-hmm.
seen 3 episodes of him, and he has plenty of time to redeem himself. I think, depending on when he dies, who knows? Um, but if they lean more into this darkness, I think I could definitely get on board with him. It's just
Mm.
with me, it's this balance between him coming out with these one-liners, his like sultry looks towards Galadriel, and I think that the moments that irritated me were as they're coming out of the throne room, the way he pulls her towards him felt like it was shot to be put in one of these ship fan cams. And I know I'm only saying that because I've
See,
seen it in
okay,
the
no,
cams.
hang on, Anna, hang on. I see you're reverse engineering this now. You've watched those fan
Yes.
cams, and and it's angered you so much that you're now looking at the scenes in this different light. Because okay, I know what you mean, but also the way he grips her arm, and I think we saw this in one of the trailers, they're going to repeat that gesture later, is a much more military embrace. It's like that classic kind of Roman forearm shake. And I know what you're saying. I really
This is
do.
when
But
the
I
influence of
also
social
think,
media comes in because I've seen this so many times with like these like
yeah,
romantic there's romantic music in the back that I just can't disassociate it now.
I know, I
Yeah.
know. Some of our mutuals on Twitter are big Galbrand or Haladriel or Halatariel, whatever the ship name is these days. Um, Yeah. Okay. Let's not. We'll derail ourselves if we talk
Yeah,
about
I do want
Halbrand
to
much
say,
longer.
I think he does have potential, and I don't want to be one of those people because I am a criticizer of these people that decide they hate a character off the bat. I don't want to be that
Mm,
person, and I don't want to sound bitter because I don't care that people ship them. Morvith and Charlie have like incredible chemistry.
mm.
This that scene where she goes up to him and she says Halbrand and he says don't start. It's like, oh my, okay,
That was.
okay.
I'll be honest. That was very hot. That was very hot.
Yeah, I he's not lost on me. I do dislike him at this moment in time, but there's bound to be characters that we don't like. It's like in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. This is a controversial one,
Mm,
but I don't like how Merry is portrayed in the films. I don't hate him,
mm.
but he's definitely not one of my favorite characters, whereas in the books he is. So things aren't always going to land. I hope that he proves me
Yeah.
wrong. Everyone says to me, just wait a few episodes. We've got all these screenshots of you saying you hate him, you're going to change your mind. And I hope that I do. I really hope that I do because I want to
Mm.
see what everyone else sees and I want to like him, especially if we go down this dark path because it would be an interesting route to explore unless he's Sauron because I think that would make me cry in a bad way.
Yeah, we got this question from a couple of viewers, so we might as well handle it now. Do we have any theories on who Halbrand is? We talked about this on our episode 1 and 2 discussion. I think we're both in the camp that he's most likely going to be a future ring wraith, whether that's the
Yeah.
Witch King, whether that's Carmul, whether an unnamed ring wraith. After this episode, I think there's still plenty of evidence for that darkness in him, that violence in him, that legacy of family that he talks about. That all moves in that direction. I will just say I think people are allowing themselves to be led a little bit too much when they say, "Oh, look, he was talking to the smiths and saying that he could forge steel better than anyone." And he said, I go by many names, or I picked this up off the dead man. Like the show knows what it's doing. It's giving you things which book readers are going to say. Oh, Sauron goes by many names. It depends who's asking him. Oh, Sauron's he's the Maya of smithing and crafting. Yeah, that's all true, but the show is playing on it. And I will just repeat what I said on the Fellowship of Fans stream. I don't have a problem with the idea of a character like Halbrand being Sauron. My issue is that it makes no sense what he's doing if he is Sauron. Yes, it makes plenty of sense if Sauron wanted to come to Numenor to start sowing division and all that. It doesn't make sense if Sauron shipwrecks himself, ends up on a raft, gets attacked by a sea monster, then saves what will become his greatest rival pretty much in Middle-earth from drowning. So none of that makes any sense.
No.
I get why people are saying, and all I'm saying is if he is Sauron, I'm going to need a really good explanation for why he's been doing what he's doing. But I fundamentally, I am still very much on team Ringwraith, Witch King, whatever.
I feel like people, when I talk about Halbrand, everyone's just thinks that I hate him, which it's fair to think that because I do tweet a lot about how I don't like
You
him.
say it a lot.
Yeah, I, as much as I do dislike him, it's like I cannot figure out how to pronounce her name. Aarion? Aarion?
Eowyn, yeah.
Aarion.
Yeah.
They both have a lot of potential. And maybe it's because at the moment they're both original characters so far.
Hmm.
I don't know. They have potential and I'm excited to see where they go. But at the moment,
Yeah.
every time he makes a joke, I just feel like fire inside me. But that could change. I do like the ring wraith theory a lot more than the Sauron
Mm.
theory because it does make more sense logically. And like you said, that darkness in him could be manipulated well, and I would like to see that.
Yeah, I've heard a few other people say he could be the king in the mountain, the king who betrays Isildur before the last alliance and refuses to come and fight, is cursed as an oathbreaker, and then Aragorn will obviously later come and get them to redeem
Ah,
themselves in the Return of the King. I like it from a sense of Halbrand being a tragic character who, in the end, who is going to do good, but then at the pivotal moment fail. The reason I don't like it is that I think it's a bit of a waste of his character because it means that his culmination in the show would be running away from a battle,
it
and I
doesn't
just
fit.
like I don't think, yeah. So I like it. It's a cool theory. It's definitely one of my favorite crackpot theories, but I don't support it. I know we're short for time. Do we want to cover the Galadriel and Numenor stuff, or do we just want to move on to Harfoots?
Let's move on. We've got time to talk
Yeah,
about Galadriel
we talked a lot
whenever
about,
we want.
yeah. Okay, so Harfoots, we obviously had the pivotal scene this episode with the kind of festival, and then the star map, the stranger being revealed to the rest of the Harfoots, and then the reveal that they're starting their migration and that the stranger is going to help Nori's family. What were your thoughts on it? What are your kind of main takeaways on both the scenes we saw, and I think the bit we probably both want to discuss is the way Harfoot culture is being depicted in the show.
Yeah, my main takeaway from that storyline is that I was shocked when I came onto Twitter because I was really pleased with the direction they took. And then I came on to, see what everyone else was saying, and there was a lot of backlash for it. I saw a lot of articles about
Mm.
how badly written this plotline was. And this isn't me sitting here and saying I understand this story better than every single person who disagrees with me, because that's absolutely not true.
Mm.
But I think that the people who thought that it was just badly written, and I'm not saying the people who didn't like it because there are reasons to dislike it, but the people who write it
Mm.
off as bad writing with no thought behind it didn't really understand what they were going for. Because, these are
Mm.
hobbits before we know the hobbits. And like we know from Tolkien, hobbits aren't always these happy go lucky people. They can be selfish and rude, and they're not always great. And I think that's a really good line that they've gone down because I didn't want them to be just there for the comedic relief. We knew they would be there for the light-hearted moments, and they still were during this episode. The whole interaction with
Mm.
Poppy and Nori and Sadok, where she was trying to get the maps off the table, that made me smile a lot. This kind of they went down this line of hypocrisy and this kind of unspoken horror in the culture that they have. They come
Mm.
out during this festival, and I can't remember exactly what they were singing, but it was something like, nobody leaves the
Uh,
trail, nobody walks
it
alone.
was Yeah, it was that,
Nobody
wasn't
goes
it?
off
Yeah.
trail, nobody walks alone. And
Yeah.
then you cut after that to them talking about all the Harfoots that they left behind or that they had to leave behind.
Mm.
Especially when Poppy's whole family was read off, that was just like a bleak, bleak moment
Oh.
because it settles in that okay, this is the reason why she's been, bothering Nori about the stranger so much is that she doesn't want Nori to fall behind like her family did, which is just
Yeah.
heartbreaking. And I'm glad that they gave her that characterization because I was a bit worried that she was going to be this, funny sidekick with no real depth. But then they
Mm.
did this and it made me appreciate her character a lot more. And just the
Yeah.
Harfoot culture in general, they went down a route I wasn't expecting, but it's made me excited to see more because this is just a springboard. They're not going to set this up and just keep it how it is for the entire time. You know, they've established Nori as someone who wants to change it already. You know, she talks about it, you know, what's the use of something something if you don't have friends or something like that. Sorry, I'm terrible at memorizing quotes if you couldn't tell. But I just, you know, I understand why people didn't like that plot line, but I think it's their obstacle. You know, there would be no point of having the Harfoots in the story if they were just the same all the time. They had nothing to change, they had nothing to do. And, you know, we know Nori has the stranger, but I think he'll play a lot into this storyline as well, because without him, the Brandyfoots would have got left behind because they were clearly
Yep.
struggling. And there are some moments where you just felt quite shocked and taken aback. Like, you know, we had that Brandyfoots at the end, even though they knew Largo had the bad foot. So they were practically sentencing them to death at that point. And then just before them, you had Poppy dragging her own cart, which, you know, at first glance is just a sad shot anyway. But then you think about it for a moment and you're like, they left her to carry the cart by herself at the back of the line. So they clearly went too fussed about the fact that she would probably be left behind also. You know, they clearly cared, but it wasn't their main priority to bring her up
Yeah.
to the front of the line, which kind of shocked me a bit because we did get these like, oh, happy Harfoots vibes, and it's been completely switched on its head, but I don't mind that. I think it's a good
Yeah.
direction we're going in with them.
So I have quite a few thoughts on this. I think I largely agree with you. I like that there's a complexity to Harfoot culture. Like you say, I think people often think of the hobbits in, you know, the Third Age as just, oh, you know, they're this perfect, idyllic little community, but they can be super discriminatory to outsiders, to people within their culture. You know, think about how the hobbits think about Bilbo, you know, referring to him as cracked. You know, there has always been a level of prejudice and classism within Hobbit culture, so that didn't bother me. I think as it relates to the whole those they left behind, I think I have quite a different take on some people, and for me it goes back to a language thing. When Sadok says those we left behind, a lot of people interpreted that as an active voice, and what I mean by that is we chose to left them behind, or we, you know, like a doing verb, we left them behind. And I think it's the opposite.
Yeah,
It's almost we who left behind, you know, those who got left behind. Because go back and listen to that scene and listen to what they mean by left behind. So there was someone who got stung to death by bees. Okay,
yeah,
well, he's dead, you know, and they made a bit of a joke about it, whatever. Another who, Sadok's wife, I think we're meant to believe, got killed by wolves. So it's not someone being left behind, that's someone being killed. It
yeah.
was what was it, an avalanche or mudslide or something that killed, landslide that kills
Landslide,
Poppy's
I think.
family. So again, not left behind, killed. The only one I could say you could make an argument that they were left behind with an active choice was the first one they mentioned, who was stuck in the snows in the mountains. Now, that is probably the one you can get closest to say that was a choice to leave them behind. But, you know, as any story you will ever read about mountaineering and, you know, pre kind of modern era expeditioneering, that's something that has always happened. I'm not saying it's a good thing, it's just a fact. And if you are a migratory culture, especially one that is threatened by anything bigger than you, which is most things in this world, you have to be quite utilitarian. And so I'm not even saying that it's a good thing, but I'm just saying, like, I think this idea that it's brutal is just a little bit simplistic for my taste. Like, it's not brutal because 9 out of 10 cases we heard about were people dying, and so okay, they left them behind in that sense. And the one other case was, you know, what I imagine is a horrible, horrific choice, but it's not brutal. It's a reality of life. And I think and again, like you, I'm not trying to tell people they shouldn't feel how they feel. If you read it differently, I accept that, and, you know, I appreciate that you may have a different perspective based on your life experience. But all I'll say is, just because we want to like characters does not mean we should smooth all their harsh edges. And it is much more interesting to me to have a culture that is complex. And like you were saying at the end of the episode, you know, okay, they let the Brandyfoots come with them, but they put them at the back of the caravan because they have laws to enforce. And, you know, as we know in pretty much all societies in the world, to a certain extent, there is always an element of punishment being used to disincentivize behavior. And I think that's what Sadok's doing. He's saying, listen, I'm not going to literally sentence you to death. I'm not going to leave you behind fully, but I am going to say there is a cost for what you have done by endangering the whole society, because he is right. Nori has massively endangered them. I'm not saying what she did was wrong. In my view, of course, what she did's right, but she endangered the society. And if you're the leader of the society, then Sadok's job is to protect his people, and that's what he's trying to do. The only thing I'll disagree, perhaps with, I don't even know if we're disagreeing on this, but I don't actually think Poppy was being left behind, because, surely, given that she lost her family at some point, this is how she's always been migrating for the last few years anyway. I think she was at the back because she wanted to be there for Nori and what is clearly her kind of surrogate family. So I like you said, and I've heard other people on Twitter say it, that they were also leaving Poppy behind. I didn't read it that way, because I think this must be how Poppy always migrates, because she is on her own. But is there anything else you want to add on the Harfoots and the Stranger?
The stranger at the end saying friend, it really warmed me up to the Gandalf theory. And that's kind of what my point was about Halbrand, is that no matter what my stance is on something at the start, there's always room for change, because I was not a big fan of the Gandalf theory at first. It's not that it didn't make sense to me. I mean, I guess it still doesn't make complete sense, but I just thought there were so many other people it could be. Why have it be Gandalf? We've seen him before. We've seen him in both trilogies. But, you know, the closer he gets to Nori, and just the way he said the word friend, is like I was gone. I was like, I'm here for this. If he is Gandalf, I don't think I would be mad about it anymore.
No, I agree with you. I think, I said this on the Fellowship Fans live stream last night. The more I watch of The Stranger, the less I care who he is. And I don't mean that in a negative way, like I don't care who he is and I don't care about his character. My point is, I just find his scene so engaging. I've
Yeah,
stopped sitting there. Like episode 1 and 2, I was like, ooh, what does that mean? What does that mean? Episode 3, I was just like, oh, I just love everything about this. And like you said, when he
yeah,
said friend, do you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of Gandalf's almost sadness in his voice in the first Hobbit film, where he says, I'm Gandalf, and Gandalf means me, and it's that kind of thing. I was like, do you know what? If this is Gandalf, I don't even know if I can be mad anymore. I love the Stranger's character. And shout out to Daniel Wayman for doing so much with basically no dialogue. Incredible acting.
absolutely.
Uh,
I like him a lot more than I thought I would, because he was never something that I was really excited for going in. But every time he's on screen now, I'm either completely engaged or I'm just smiling at something that he's doing. So I
yeah.
think he's won me over completely.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. So, our final storyline for the day that we want to cover is obviously Arondir, the orcs, the work camp, sort of slave camp, and of course, right. And I'm just going to have to take a breath before I say this. But I swear to God, the white hot rage that filled me when that episode ended,
I know.
you call the episode Adar, you open the episode with the orcs talking about Adar, you end the episode with saying, bring him to Adar, and then you show me a blurry image and cut to black. It was like 6 a.m. in the morning, so I had to get up early, and I was so angry. But let's talk about that storyline. What were your kind of, highlights, lowlights? What were your feelings on that whole set of scenes?
You know what? I'm going to start off on the cliffhanger. First glance, it made me angry because I was like, I want to see him now. But I took a second and I was like, it's raised my confidence a lot in Adar, because it feels like they know that they've got a good villain to keep him from us not only this long, but to build up his introduction through an entire episode purposefully and then cut him off right at
Mm,
the end. It speaks to his character, and I hope that I'm right in saying that they're just very confident in how much of an impact he's going to have. I really want to be right in that, but it's done nothing but increase my hype for him, which, depending on how it ends up going,
same.
could be a good thing or a bad thing. But he's definitely my most anticipated plotline for episode 4. And I won't go in too much into that now because I know we're going to talk about it at the end. I actually think Aronde is my favorite original character so far. And it might be because he's one of the ones we've seen the most, but he has just completely captured me. And the thing is, he doesn't feel like an original character. He feels like a Tolkien character, and I don't know what it is about him, but he feels so integral to the story, even though he was just put in there by the story writers. Just everything about him, and I think a lot of it comes down to the performance. But you have this moment where he's apologizing to the tree before he cuts it down, and I was so choked
Mm.
up by that scene. And then it goes straight into all these action scenes. He's losing friends left, right, and center. He's dealing with the fact that he needs to get back to Bronwyn and Theo. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know who he's with. There's just so much going on with his character at the moment, and it's played so well that he's definitely the original character that I feel myself most invested in. And he feels so, I don't know how I would say, grounded in Tolkien's world. He doesn't feel
Mm.
original to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the masterful thing they've done with Arondir is tell the story of the Sylvan Elves culture through him, their
Yeah.
connection to nature. Obviously, we got that first introduction with Bronwyn, where he was, kind of horrified at the idea of those seeds being crushed.
Yeah.
We had his conversations with his fellow elves about the land. Uh, and then we've obviously had what happened in episode three. I agree with you. I think the most powerful part of that episode for me was when he said, I think it was Anin Apsane, which is Quenya for "forgive me" to the tree, which is heartbreaking. He feels the sense of loss, and it goes back to one of Tolkien's very foundational bit of writing that when Aule the Valar creates the dwarves, his wife, another Valar, basically dobs him into God. He she snitches on him
Yeah.
and says, look what Aule's done. He's created the dwarves, and they're going to cut down my trees. And at the end of the day, the one God puts them to sleep. And at the end of it, the chapter ends in a fantastic way where, you know, Yavanna basically says, well, that I'm still going to protect my animals and my trees. And he literally ends the chapter with Aule saying, and yet they will need wood, they will cut down trees for wood, basically. And the elves obviously have a very intimate relationship with nature. Arondir himself, we found out in episode 2 or episode 1, I can't remember which. Episode 1 was a grower before the war. He was a farmer. So, you know, he's got this very intense connection, and him having to finally make the choice to cut the tree down to save his compatriot's life. I think that's very Tolkienian, this idea that
Yeah.
sometimes there are no good choices, right? I also thought it was really interesting that when the Watchwarden Revion said to the orcs, this tree has been around longer than since whenever you crawled out of your pits or whatever. But what's interesting, and I think they are going to get us into it with the next episode with Adar, is that the orcs have been around not as long as the elves. Obviously, they weren't created,
Yeah.
they were twisted and corrupted. But orcs were around since Morgoth first discovered the elves because he captured them, took them back to his fortress, corrupted and twisted them, and that's how the orcs were first, came into being. So I think it's really interesting that we also got the first hints of orcish culture here as well. And it's not something that I want a lot of in the show. I don't want this to be a show about villains, so I don't want a lot of, but I like that they're layering that in already.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way they've been portrayed so far. And one of the moments that just had me really tense was when the orc, and I know a few of them had names, but I'm not going to lie, completely over my head. I'm just going to
Yeah.
call them the orcs. It's when they're having the confrontation about the tree, and it seems like he relents and he gives them some water, and he lulls
Mm-hmm.
them into this sense of security by letting the watchwarden and Arondir drink out of the water. And then you get to the last one and he slits his throat, and it's just such a shock, but it's so well done because he doesn't just kill him. He he's kind of psychologically torturing them at the same time because he made them feel not safe, because you'd never feel safe somewhere like that, but he made them feel comfortable enough to expose such, a risky part of themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
I just think the orcs felt so grounded, and a lot of that does come down to the practical effects, which were just amazing, from their designs to the clothes they were wearing. Everything was just so amazing. Like, they were so creepy the way they were like running around and shielding themselves from the sun. Just everything about their design just works for me in the way
Yeah.
that obviously they didn't in the Hobbit films. I don't despise them in the Hobbit films, but they never felt real to me, whereas they do in this. And I love the way they kind of have this reverence for Adar, which you feel throughout the whole of the episode. And I like the little red herring they put in. Obviously, not for people who've been keeping up with the show, because we know Adar, very very small chance he would be Sauron. But I like the
Mm.
kind of little thing they put in, because my brother, again, who doesn't really know much about it other than the original films, he was like, "Oh my gosh, is this Sauron?" And I was like, "Well, here's the thing." But
Mm.
I just think that whole storyline was really good. It was really intriguing, and the fight scene where they were, fighting with their chains pulling on either side of them, it was just so fun to watch, and
Mm.
not a typical battle where it's just one against the other. They were kind of, I don't really know how to describe it, but it had me invested until the war came along. And I just wanted to
Okay.
hug it because it looked so cute, and I didn't like that because
Yeah.
it wasn't supposed to be cute.
So I actually want to talk, and I'll agree with you on the fight scene. By the way, I thought the wire work, for Arondir's stunts was very good, especially when
Yeah,
he leapt up with the axe. That was clearly done practically in camera with wires. Really, really good work.
really.
Similarly, some of his other stunts were really good wire work as well. I liked that when he was finally pulled back from the tree by his chain, he used a piece of the tree to kill the orcs. So it's
Yeah,
this idea that as he's being forced to kill the tree, he is going to at least use the tree to
yeah,
get back at the orcs. I love that. As for the warg, now I've heard people say the CGI was bad. I want to say a couple of things on that. There's one moment for me where the CGI doesn't work, and it's a really tricky problem in VFX. It's the point where the orc goes from the shadow of the tunnel out into the light, and there's literally like a couple of dozen frames where the CGI looks a bit wonky. And like, to be honest, for a show that has been doing incredible compositing, and by that I mean mixing practical foregrounds with CGI backgrounds and background extensions, I'm going to forgive them for that. But as for people saying that they don't like the design, I get it. But also, I think, I don't know why I haven't seen more people saying this. In the same way that the orcs in this show are not the strong, kind of armored, organized orcs that we see in the Lord of the Rings. In the same way, these aren't wargs that are being bred in huge pits and that there's this whole organized, military for Sauron yet. So for me, it looked mangy. It looked quite young as well. Like you said, there was almost an infant puppy quality of it. And I liked all that. I liked that it didn't look as terrifying. But I'll be honest, like when people say, "Oh, it wasn't scary," I'm like, "Well, okay." When it was ripping out their stomachs, that seemed pretty scary to me. And I listen. I like the design. I think, and this isn't me like just defending the show for anything, because I have criticisms about even this episode, which maybe I can get into. But yeah, no, I really like the wall design.
yeah. I think for me, it's not more how scary it looked. And I think it comes down to the eyes. That was my main gripe with it. If the eyes were different, I would have been completely sold on the design.
Yeah.
But where I think the orcs look really real and grounded, that kind of pulled me out of it for a moment, because it felt like it could
Mm.
have been in, like a Disney film, a live action Disney film. And that's not an insult, because it was really well animated, but I think it was too well animated to the point that it didn't feel real to me anymore.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That I think the problem was that we'd just been watching, like 20 minutes of practical orcs, and then to
Yeah,
have the CGI walk, like it's, and like I get it, it's super difficult. And at a certain point, I am someone who is always very forgiving of like the odd bit of
yeah,
shaky CGI because I suspend my disbelief every time I turn on the TV and watch a fantasy show.
yeah.
So, yeah, seeing as I don't want to keep you too long. On the orc plotline, one of our questions, and let me just check who this came from. I believe this was Andrew Hansen asked. who is Adar? That's the main question I have. The father of the orcs. Um, I've got my own theories about this, but where are you now after episode 3 in terms of who you think Adar is?
I would be happy right now if he was, obviously he's the father of the Hawks. I would be happy if he's someone who's already in league with Sauron, working under him for him. You know, we know what's eventually going to happen to the Southlands, which, oh my gosh, I already love this plot so much.
Mm.
I don't want him to be more than that, especially if he's just going to be a villain for 1 or 2 seasons. You know, I've spoke about it before. A lot of people think he's going to be one of Galadriel's brothers, which, in the grand scheme of things, it
To be
doesn't
honest,
affect much.
yeah, I've heard that Fellowship, when I was on their stream last night, I've heard that they're kind of walking back the whole Galadriel's brother thing. So I think that might have
Oh,
been a
really?
leak that they never had 100% confidence in because, yeah, one of the
Um,
panelists said, oh, we were never 100% certain. So I don't know.
yeah. I know this, you know, when it comes to Tolkien, I this might be a controversial thing to say, but not everything needs to be completely deep rooted into every single plot line around it. And what I mean by
Yes.
that is that if Adar is a villain who was manipulated by Sauron in some way, you know, he's obviously going to be a corrupted elf, which is a really interesting angle to explore. If he is just a corrupted elf who was manipulated by Sauron, it could sound basic to some people, but it's a villain, and I
Mm.
think that's enough to work with to make an interesting
Yeah.
character because he's got a lot going on for him already. Father of the Orcs,
Yeah.
corrupted elf. He's got that storyline that we can follow.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think what we're going to find out is that he's a corrupted elf, maybe even a first age elf, early first age. He might even be one of the earliest, corrupted elves. And that's why he is still quite elf looking in that,
Yeah,
he is almost one of the more refined versions. And that's why the orcs also revere him as a father figure. I
yeah,
know people on the timeline have been saying, oh, it could be Maglor, it could be whoever. I don't think the show is going to go and like play with Tolkien characters that they don't really have the rights to, and B, why would
yeah,
they want to? And I agree. You said it so perfectly. Not everything needs to be a callback to something else. Like it can just be a good character. In the same way, Arondir is a good original character. Adar can be a good original character. I'm I will say what I'm still nervous about, and I know you said like it's kind of a vote of confidence from you that they feel comfortable not to give him to us till episode 4. I'm still nervous about that. If he and that I'm nervous if he's a one season villain, because if he's a one season villain, I do think there's a danger that waiting till episode 4 may have been too late. Hopefully, I'm
yeah,
wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong. And we're obviously going to get him speaking to Arondir in the preview for episode 4. We see Arondir saying, "Who are you?" in Quenya to him. Um, and just before we finish this area, I do actually want to highlight my few criticisms of this episode, and they actually do have to do with that plot line. The first being, I didn't like that we didn't get an explanation for how Arondir's elven companions were also captured. Like I know we're just meant to assume, okay, there weren't many of them at the Watchtower. They were clearly traveling to either come and find Arondir or leave the Southlands. But I didn't like that, you know, we could have at least had the Watchwarden saying, we were ambushed in the forest at night, or, we were caught unawares. Like that would have been enough for me. I just wanted, and I'm not someone who needs everything explained to me, but I would have liked that. And then the second thing that's bothering me, and I'm sorry, this is such a I apologize for anyone who's listening who's not a book nerd like I am, but it does bother me that the Sylvan Elves are speaking Quenya in the same way that it bothered me that they were taking orders from Gil-galad. Because for those who aren't aware, the Sylvan Elves, which you will most commonly know as the Woodland Elves, and they are very culturally distinct from the Noldor Elves, the High Elves, the Galadriel, Gil-galad, and to a smaller extent Elrond is, although he's got he's a bit of a mutt when it comes to his elven heritage. But I don't like that that's being flattened, and I hope it's just a season 1 thing, because what I really want is to still maintain the role of Orifer and the Woodland Elves and that political difference between them and the Noldor under Gil-galad. So I'm hoping this is just a streamlining thing for season 1, because they weren't going to introduce Orifer and his kingdom. and they probably just wanted to work in one Elvish language. But it is a point of concern for me. I'll say that.
Yeah, you see, a lot of the concerns I had with the episode were more production sided, which I felt bad for because, so much work went into the show. I don't want to sit here and just pick it apart. But there were little things, like the animation of the warg, I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
too happy with. A lot of the slow motion used didn't really land with me at all.
Yes.
And there was one moment, this is a complete nitpick, and I know that I'm just being a difficult viewer who's too hard to please. But when the warg comes out and pounces on the first elf, the scream that's played over the
What
top,
was that scream?
it
What
was
was that?
terrible. It took me out of it completely because it was that random that I was just like, did I really just hear that? I didn't
Do you know what
like
it
it.
was? It was like Peter Jackson overusing the Wilhelm screen in his
Yeah,
films, and it's just like I don't think the Wilhelm screen is funny. I don't think it's cute. It irritates me to no end when filmmakers use it. And actually, I want to talk to you about the slow mo. Here's I know some people have like been defending the show on the slow mo, and I think slow mo can be used well. And what irritates me so much was that it was used well in the show. It was used really well when Methor, Arondir's companion, was killed by the orcs, and we get that amazing
yeah,
slow mo shot of the water dropping and him collapsing. Brilliant use of slow mo. Arondir flipping over the orc and jumping up. Good use of slow mo. My issue is then why are we using slow mo in like 8 other scenes? I actually lost count. Like it's like the Zack Snyder problem. And listen, if anyone's a big Zack Snyder fan, like I'm fine with that. Like if you like his films, but he has an aesthetic choice, which is I'm gonna overuse slow mo in my opinion. And it was just like we didn't need that many slow mo scenes. I swear, we really didn't.
yeah. It was like Galadriel on the horse. We had about four consecutive slow mo shots of just this one scene of her riding the horse, and I think they would have been fine if there was one or two, but just the
Yeah,
way
the
they
one
were
with the
one after
robes.
the other. Yeah, it was beautiful, but by the end of it, I was just like, oh, another one. Oh, another one. And it takes away how well done the impactful slow mo is, the one that really should
Yeah.
be there. And that's not me. I've never made a TV show. I can't sit here and be like, you should put this here and you should put this there. But it's
Mm,
just, I guess, what works for me and what didn't. Because I know a lot of people did like the slow mo.
yeah.
It wasn't for me.
I think that's where we've both arrived is like it was used simultaneously in episodes so well and then
Yeah,
just too much. Like I said, like that scene of Methor dropping the water and Bear McCreary's score over the top. I mean, just
yeah,
phenomenal TV, like absolutely phenomenal TV. But then I felt that moment and the use of slow motion was then really undercut by its overuse later in the episode. Again, like it's a super small point, but like I'm not going to sit here and pretend I like it, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Not very sure to say that we don't like things, but it's true.
I know, I know. Amazon's not going to pay me anymore if I keep this up. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we get into our overall final thoughts and rating for the episode?
I think I've covered everything that I
Hmm.
wanted to say. I'm not always the knowledgeable one when it comes to discussion, but what I do want to like, I like just talking about the things that I like, but then balancing it out with what I didn't like because,
Hmm.
I don't want to be negative all the time and always talk about the things that I didn't like. So I think that it is good sometimes to get it out there. So I'm glad we got to
Yeah.
talk about that because that scream just really played on my mind because I was like, I wonder if anyone else noticed that because it really just brought me out of things. But what the thing about this show is, for every little detail that I nitpick and that I don't like, it gets completely lost in my mind because everything else is so amazing. And the character work, the score, the set design, everything in the show is just so phenomenal that the little things that I don't like, they really matter.
No, I agree. Like, and none of our complaints have been about the plot or the acting, and those are always going to be the two most important things for me. So, yeah, I agree. I think it's perfectly fine to have things we don't like. And literally, one of my points is such an obscure piece of Tolkien, you know, like the fact they're speaking Quenya. Like, you've got to have read the Silmarillion and remembered the whole, issue of language between this.
I would love to hear Wizard Way Chris's take on this.
Mm.
You know, just to see what they think. I don't know if they've tweeted about it before, but it would be quite interesting to know.
Yeah, and I've heard some people say maybe it's about the passage of time, maybe it's the unique place in the second age of an era of peace, maybe that's why we're having this resurgence of Quenya. But again, like, it wouldn't bother me if the show hadn't always described Arondir as a Sylvan elf, and like that just doesn't compute for me. Then why he, like, I
Yeah,
don't mind that he knows Quenya, but why is he speaking it to others anyway? It doesn't matter. I'm not. We're getting so caught up on this.
yeah.
Let's round out our discussion of the episode then. So last week we decided we were going to rate each episode on a scale of 1 to 10. Last week for episode 2, we both gave episode 2 9 out of 10. Now you have said that you preferred this episode to episode 2. So if you gave episode 2 a 9 out of 10, what does episode 3 get from you?
I'm going to have to go up to 9.5 because it's
Oof.
definitely my favourite so far. But now I'm thinking, should I have started lower? Because if they get better every episode, I'm going to be in like the 30s soon.
Yeah.
But I loved it. It was a solid 9.5 for me. I wouldn't be amazed if the episodes kept getting better, but this is just amazing as a standard for me. If the
Yeah.
episodes were
Yeah.
always this good for me, it would be great. And that's not to say that the others were bad, because they got an 8.5 and a 9 from me, which is completely high end anyway. Maybe I started too high, but yeah,
Yeah.
solid 9.5.
Who knows? Maybe when we get to the end of season 1, we'll do some retroactive rescoring, depending on
Yeah.
how we feel. So I gave episode 1. I think I was quite harsh on episode 1 because of the pacing and other elements I didn't like, and I think I gave it a 7.5. And then I gave episode 2 a 9, like you. I think for me, episode 3 it's probably a solid. It's an 8. It's an 8. I was really tempted to give it an 8.5, and I do love Numenor, but I think overall what I think is we're 3 episodes in, and episode 3 outside of Numenor should have achieved more, is what I'm saying, I guess. Like, the Harfoot stuff, fine, good. Like, and it's weird for me to say this because I loved the Arondir stuff, I loved the Harfoot stuff, but the plot didn't necessarily. And it's weird because I said that episode 1 pacings was too fast, and now I'm like, well, do I think episode 3's pacing was too slow? No, I think the pacing was great. But again, not introducing Adar this episode. I think it's clever and I think it's good. But again, I have this worry about the villain not being introduced till episode 4.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just it's a concern for me. So I'm gonna give it an 8. But if I was rating Numenor, it would probably be back up to a 9, 10 sort of area. So
Yeah, I think there was no doubt about the fact that this was going to be my highest rated episode. No matter
yeah.
how great the plot was outside of Lendil, this was always going to be number one.
Yeah, I mean, really, we should just retitle this episode the Elendilf Appreciation Hour for Anna. So, I mean, it's not a place where logic is going to prevail. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. So we're gonna answer a few of the questions users submitted. Me and Anna are going to discuss some questions about that were relevant to the episode, and then any that aren't relevant to the episode, I might just cover in a brief after show. Okay. Alvaro asks, how do you think Miriel's relationship with Galadriel will evolve during the season, and will Pharazôn be an enemy to Galadriel? Thoughts on that?
I think Miriel's relationship with Galadriel is going to hinder a lot on her relationship with Elendil, because, like you said before, we've seen her kind of try to gauge how much she can trust him with her. So I think the bond that Elendil and Galadriel form is going to be how Miriel kind of, kind of forges her own relationship with Galadriel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be all about whatever we learn the prophecy is about this elf returning that Miriel has with her father. It's going to be about Elendil helping convince Miriel to go to Middle-earth. As for the question, will Pharazôn be an enemy to Galadriel? I don't think Galadriel's going to stick around long enough in Numenor for that to be an issue.
Yeah.
And I don't think Galadriel's ever coming back to Numenor, to be honest, which is good. Like, she shouldn't in terms of the overall story arc. But I think it's less going to be that Galadriel's going to be an enemy of Pharazôn. It's more going to be that Pharazôn is going to be an enemy of the elves. So it's much. All I'm saying is it's much broader. Yes, technically Galadriel will be Pharazôn's enemy, but not within Numenor. And as a follow-up question to that, Archduke Charles of Austria, we have royalty asking us questions, asked, what are your thoughts on Galadriel being, shall we say, extremely undiplomatic in the throne room? At Menelaus, the consensus, even among fans of the show, is divided on this. Just for reference, Archduke Charles wrote his own thread about this, which was very interesting and had a much more sympathetic reading of the screen. What's your view on the way? Because I have strong feelings on this as well, but what are your thoughts on Galadriel's manner in the throne room in that initial scene?
Mine goes back to an interview that Morvith did when she talks about how she's going to portray Galadriel's naivety because, she's thousands of years old. She's not going to be typically naive at this point, and she decided to play it through arrogance. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
shines in that scene because, from her perspective, she's surrounded by men who broke away from this elvish relationship they had, and she explains to Halbrand that there's sadness that she feels towards it. She already has a lot of emotions towards these people, and she's not like Halbrand, who comes in and he doesn't really know anything about Numenor as far as we know, or anything like this. And
Yeah.
in her mind, she needs a ship. She needs to leave. She doesn't want to stick around to make friends, to make alliances. She just needs to go. You know, she jumped off this ship that was about to go into Valinor because she felt like her task wasn't complete, that Sauron was still out there, and
Mm-hmm.
she's not going to take the time to be graceful and polite when the biggest danger in Middle Earth is still out there. And I
Yeah.
guess a lot you could take it in the way that, if she was polite, she maybe could get out there quicker by forming these relationships with people. But it goes to this arrogance that she thinks what she's doing is right and the best way to
Yeah.
do things.
Yeah. I agree with everything you said. I would just build on that and say, this for me is what I love about the show's portrayal of Galadriel, that she is still the princess of the Noldor who stood among the Feanorians and the rest of the
Yes.
House of Finwë during the exile and said, I want to go to Middle Earth, I want to rule my own kingdoms, who lied to Melian Amaya about the kinslaying when she stayed in Doriath. And this is a real deep cut on the Silmarillion, so apologies to our non-book readers. But Galadriel's history is not one of being this, oh, I'm very charming and lovely. It's her like being strong-willed, arrogant, and also let's remember, and I don't know that this is the show's fault or the book's fault. I think it's actually a little bit of Peter Jackson's fault. Elves are very dismissive towards humans through most of the history. There are a few exceptions to this. There's the first age where the Adain help the elves in the war against Morgoth, but even then, many men betray them, do bad things. When the men first turn up, the elves call them the sickly and the aftercomers. Elves are racist as all hell against men when they first meet them, and it comes up again and again throughout the second age, the third age. So I just think people need to remember that Galadriel isn't some kind of, all benevolent, loving person. Like, she's very proud, she's very
Yeah.
arrogant. And I also want to remind people this is a character arc. Even in this episode, she realized that she had friends and allies there. When she says to Halbrand, that's all about to change, it's because she's realized through her interactions with Elendil that she can actually find an alliance here, that actually there is an opportunity here. So I just don't get this whole thing where people are saying Galadriel's one note. In this episode alone, we got her building an alliance with Elendil slowly, realizing she should be building an alliance with Miriel, and trying to build an alliance with the Southlands by trying to get Halbrand to embrace his destiny. She's no longer saying, like, I don't care what you do, Halbrand. She's saying, no, I want to build an alliance with you. So, yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of summarized it, but I think we both kind of agreed that there's a lot more complexity there. Okay, there are a couple of questions here which are about broader things than the episode, so I might answer those myself at the end of the episode because there might be some kind of later season spoilers in here, so people can tune out if they want to. Isn't that interesting? Asked about the harsh realities of living as a Harfoot. We've answered that. Okay, Daughter of Vikings asks this question: what is the cause between the animosity between elves and Numenorians? Um, that's a very long answer, one we don't quite have time for in this podcast. What I'll say is Matt from Nerd of the Rings has done a lot of great videos on this on YouTube if you want to learn more about the deep lore, but I'll try and sum it up as best I can. Men are mortal, elves are immortal. And yes, the Adine, who became the Numenorians at the end of the First Age, fought with the elves against Morgoth. Yes, they were given this great gift by the Valar, but we are now several thousand years past that, or at least 1,000 and some change. So the Numenorians have reached a point where they have been living for hundreds of years on this island, and something the show hasn't mentioned yet, they are forbidden from sailing to Valinor. They are explicitly banned by the Valar from sailing any more west than as long as they can still see the shores of Numenor. So they have that restriction put upon them by the Valar, the gods. They're also told, they're just told the fact is you're mortal. It's a gift from Iluvatar. Now, over time, that shadow, that doubt inside them grows. Now, I can't really explain the whole history of Numenor in a 60-second answer, but all I'll say is what you need to think about is that this society that started off as being founded by Elrond's brother, Elros, the half-elf, and at that time, they were closer than they'd ever been to elves. Several hundreds, if not thousands of years have passed now, and men are stuck on this island. Yes, they live long. Yes, they're very wealthy, but they still see the immortal elves out there. They still know they're not allowed to go to Valinor, the Undying Lands. And for certain men, we know the weakness in men's hearts that Morgoth sowed with them at the beginning of time is a big theme for Tolkien. So I won't spoil anything that comes later in the Numenor story or later seasons, but let's just leave it there and say it's about mortality and the fear of death, and it's about what does it mean to be a mortal being in a world filled with immortal beings, and how would that affect you. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do a longer episode on these wider themes. Maybe I can do a kind of mid-season special talking about that. But yeah, that would be my answer for now. Okay, we've talked about our Halbrand theories, so thank you for the questions, Dan, Desmond, and Laura Million. Hopefully our answers during the show were enough on that. Tiana Bayert asks a great question. How the heck does a Rondir get out of this one? I have no idea. Do you have any ideas?
I have no idea, but I'm very excited to see how. I mean, I think from trailers we know that he does get out.
Yeah,
So I don't actually know if I like having that reassurance because I think if we hadn't seen any of the clips of him in the trailers, I'd be like, well, this is it. He's not going to
yeah,
escape from this. Though I do think it'll be interesting to see how he does it because his elf allies they're both gone now.
yeah.
It's basically just him and all. They're the Southlanders with him?
Yeah, I think we're meant to assume that, right? So I guess okay, if you want my really crackpot theory, because I agree, like I have no idea how he manages an escape on his own, but here's my really crackpot theory: Adar lets him go, and I don't know why. I
Well, I think I can't see a way that he would get out by himself.
Yeah,
So it doesn't sound that far fetched to me, but it is the why.
yeah, like it's a crackpot theory because it doesn't make any sense to me, but also I don't know how else he escapes. What I guess
Yeah.
could be is that Adar hopes that Arondir is going to lead them to the Southlanders, but then again, I'm sure they already know. Yeah, it's a big open question, but I tell you what, I cannot wait for that scene of Arondir and Adar talking to one another. How good is that going to be? I
It's going to
mean,
be incredible.
incredible.
Though I did, one of the things I was worried about was that I think it was Tolkien with Friends, who's a great podcast. They commented on, I think it was one of my TikToks, and they said, I have a horrible, horrible feeling that they're not going to pick up on that storyline until the episode after.
Mm,
I disagree because I feel like they left it the way that they left Elendil in the last one, the hint of the
yeah,
Numenor theme, the silhouette, and then we got him the next episode. It was like a promise, basically. I think that's what
yeah.
they've done again this time, but I would be so, so gutted if that was withheld from the next episode.
Yeah, no, I don't think it is, because the episode 4 30-second teaser has Arondir clearly speaking to Adar, so I wouldn't be surprised if they even open it, like you said, in the same way they opened
Oh,
with.
I haven't not seen the teaser. When did this get
Okay,
released?
so it's on their Amazon app. So do you want to quickly watch it so you can get your thoughts?
Yeah, I will. You did get a question before that I thought was interesting because we did kind of brush it off, and it was the, what does the sea is always right mean? Which
Oh,
obviously it means the sea is always right. But I think that has a good tie into the faithfulness idea and the idea of faith because, and it was just in this one scene, after we've been introduced to Isildur where they're on the shore and they're kind of repeating this, but his heart isn't in it as much as everyone else. It kind of relates to this blind faith. He doesn't quite feel the same kind of thing,
yeah,
which I just wanted
yeah.
to mention because I thought that was quite a good
No, you're right.
question.
We did miss that question. Thank you to Planet for asking that question. I agree with you. I think the significance of that was to then let us see the dual perspectives, because Elendil says it
Yeah,
to Miriel and he means it, whereas Isildur says it among the other cadets and doesn't seem to mean it. So I think that's very interesting. And I think it's also, people said the line seemed a bit like mundane and cheesy, but for me, like, it was very, like, if you've I was in the cadets at school, to out a bit of my personal life history here, and I'll be honest, the military doesn't come up with particularly poetic slogans. It comes, or chants, it comes up with very
yeah,
basic stuff. And I could absolutely see a Numenorian naval officer, or tradition being shouting, the sea is always right at the sea. So for me, I was like, yep, militaristic culture, that seems very right. But I agree with you. I think the significance was about seeing the different intonations between Elendil saying it to Miriel and Isildur saying it with the rest of the crew. Okay, so for viewers, because I don't know how I'm going to edit this, Anna had not seen the episode 4 teaser that's available on the Amazon app. Anna, you've now seen the teaser. So the question I want to lead you. Well, actually, no. Just tell me what you think about that teaser, and then I'll lead you in with our listener question.
Elrond and the dwarves are back. I'm very happy. Bronwyn is also back. Very, very happy. Um, I didn't think we were going to get Galadriel and Muriel that early on. Is that who we're seeing interact?
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing in that trailer is Galadriel talking about Halbrand when she says, "The man you have in your dungeons is no common brawler. He could unite his people." So I think clearly we're going to get the follow up to what we saw with Galadriel, Elendil, and Miriel this episode.
Yeah, I didn't think it would be that early on, but I am excited to see, because obviously we've talked about how that dynamic is going to play out, so that will be really exciting
Mm,
to see. I don't know what's going to happen with the dwarves. I have a feeling, obviously, it's going to be to do with the mithril.
yeah.
I'm assuming it's mithril that they found, and maybe Elrond finding out about it. I don't know whether it'll happen this episode or it'll be kind of the build up to it.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what that man said to Theo, but it was different from the dialogue we've heard from that scene, right?
Yeah, okay. So here's the question, and this came from my good friend on Twitter, and I think you know him as well. Wizard on Wheels asked,
Yes.
"I know this line is in the preview for episode 4, but what do you think it means for our characters and the Southlands when Waldreg, who's the barkeep, you'll all remember from episode 1 and 2, what does it mean when he says to Theo, 'It is to you and me, lad, to be ready'?" And from the trailer, we had him saying, "Have you heard of him, lad? Have you heard of
Yeah.
Sauron?" So I think this is all coming from the same conversation. So for me, I'll give my answer and then you let me know what you think. What does it mean? I think it means that we now have the answer for sure that it was Waldreg's barn who Theo found the sword in.
Yeah.
And I think Waldreg's going to be a bit of a Grima Wormtongue, if you ask me. I think he's going to betray the other Southlanders to Adar and the Orcs. So that's what I think it means. Or if he doesn't do that, then he is at least going to encourage Theo to pick up the sword again, to play around with it. So yeah, it's very interesting to me. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I mean, I can't disagree with you. It definitely sounds like that's the confirmation we've got. And I like that we're going more into Theo's plot because he's either going to go down this dark path and end up somewhere not great. But, just because he's saying it's for me and you to be ready. It doesn't mean that Theo will be. And I think that's going to be quite an interesting thing to play on, whether Theo is going to be good or bad. But I do like that we've kind of basically got the confirmation of whose bond that weapon was in. Because when I did, I will admit, I don't think I've talked about this. When I first watched that trailer, and I think it was in the Comic Con trailer maybe, when he says the line about Sauron,
Mm,
I didn't like it. Gave it kind of reminded me of, in like a slasher horror film when there's
mm.
like a group of kids and they go to like a gas station and there's like a crazy old man there and he's like, "You're gonna get yourself killed if you go there." Horrible
Yeah.
impression, but that's what it reminded me of when I first saw it in the trailer. But in the new context, it makes more sense to me.
Yeah, no, I think it's really intriguing to me, and like you say, I think they're clearly going to dive into this idea that the humans basically standing around saying, "Oh, that young, irritating bully kid." By the way, the actor's doing a fantastic job. We're meant to hate him, so no hate on the actor, but that kid is, I hate him. But when he says to Arondir, "Oh, it all happened generations ago. Leave it alone." I think we're gonna find out that's not true. That people like Waldreg still very much do feel like they're waiting for the return of their their dark and terrible lord. So, um, yeah, very interesting to see what's going to happen on that. And I'll say that I'm still very much open to the idea that Halbrand could be Theo's father. So
Me too.
I
Me.
am, like I'm wondering, are they both? I don't think they're both going to be ring wraiths, but I think I listen. All I'm saying is I don't think there's a chance that we get to the end of season 5 and at least one of Halbrand and Theo aren't ring wraiths. Like I'm sure of
I
that.
think it would be, how I've just said that Theo, though he's going down a dark path, he doesn't necessarily have to end up somewhere dark. It would be interesting if Halbrand was his father, if one of them fell to the darkness and the other one didn't.
Yeah,
Maybe that would be quite interesting, I think.
I agree. I agree. Okay, well, I think we've got through all our questions for the audience. There's two questions or two sets of questions which are about wider lore issues. I may just answer those on Twitter because it's very difficult for me to. So these are the questions from David Wright, which are more about the lore in the books, and I just don't want to spoil people on the podcast. So if I haven't answered them on the podcast, guys, I'll reply to you on Twitter directly. But yeah, I think we've covered all the questions that we had from listeners. We've talked about everything episode 3. We've talked about the teaser for episode 4. Let me just ask you this final question then. What is the one thing you're looking forward to most in episode 4?
Adar, 100%. You know, like I said, I am maybe foolishly confident that he's going to be a good villain. The cliffhanger just it was the same with Elendil. I was gutted that we didn't see him in the first 2 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, they know that they've got a good character and they know that Numenor's such a good place that it's not going to be something you just shove in at the end.
Mm-hmm.
They made us wait and it was completely worth it. And so I have a feeling it's going to be like that again. I hope I'm right, but that's definitely what I'm most excited for.
Yeah. I'm actually going to 100% agree with you. While I am very excited to have my favorite orphaned boy Elrond back on screen and to have the dwarves back with us, that's going to be great. In terms of the plot, yeah, give me Adar. And I'll say as well, I may be skeptical about the length of time it's took to introduce him, but I have no concerns that he's going to be a disappointing villain because Joseph Maul, who plays him, plays a fantastic villain. For any viewers who've seen Ripper Street, which was originally a BBC show and then Amazon actually picked it up, funnily enough, in later seasons, he played a very sort of morally grey but also villainous character in that, and he's got a real menace about him. So I'm very excited to see what he does. So yeah.
I like what we've heard. I don't know if it was confirmed for definite, but I think it was him who spoke the line in the trailer, you've been told many lies of Middle Earth. The
Oh yeah.
voice was just incredible. And if he's having, this conversation with Arondir, oh
Yes.
my gosh, I cannot wait.
I think we might hear that line next episode when, Arondir says, "Who are you?" I think, Arondir might be saying, "Who are you? Why are you an elf?" Blah, blah, blah. and he's going to say, "You have been told many lies of Middle-earth." You know,
Great
it,
impression.
no, I can't. Joe Small has a beautifully raspy voice, and in the same way, I could never match Lloyd Owen's chocolatey tones.
I didn't mention his voice.
Okay, am
How
I
did
going to
I
have
not
to
mention
cue
his
the
voice?
music? Do I just cue the music? No, I'm joking. Say what you would like to say about Lloyd Owen's voice.
I'm gonna keep it brief. There was not one line that he delivered that I didn't like feel in my bones. He just has the most Elendil voice, and I know that that's not a thing,
It is
but I
not.
think that there was an expectation, and a lot of people actually said to me that they didn't think Elendil was an adoptable character, but they all had their minds changed when they saw him. And, he's obviously an incredible actor, but a lot of it, I think, is down to his delivery of the lines and his voice. It's just amazing. And that's all I'm going to
Yeah.
say. I'm going to stop myself there.
Well, thank you for keeping it PG-13. This is a family-friendly
You're
show.
welcome.
I really appreciate it. But listen, I'll say, seeing as you've really outed yourself about how much you were kind of simping for Elendilf in this episode, I'll just say I have no idea what the director said to him during that scene with Galadriel by the docks, but he had no right being so sultry in every scene. He was just like leaning against the walls, standing around there,
This
pointing at her, giving her the eyebrows.
moment when she points her dagger at him, and I think she says, something like,
What if the words never left your lips? And he says, what if they did?
"Oh my gosh, just incredible." Yeah, but let's
It was,
let's stop it there before it doesn't say PG-13.
yeah, exactly. Listen, all I'll say is, though, and I'll get the final word on my own podcast because I get to decide what I say. If you're complaining
Awesome.
about the chemistry between Halbrand and Galadriel, I'm sorry. Elendil should not have been looking at Galadriel that way. And that's all I'll say. Well, on that note of us both struggling to keep it PG-13 about the House of Elendilf, let's just finish by once again saying thank you everyone for listening. Thank you as well for the questions. So many of you submitted questions this week. It's so nice of you. And thank you for doing that. Hopefully we can do more of this in the future. And also, of course, I have to thank my ever wonderful, my ever gracious co-host Anna, who was only going to come on for an hour today because she's an incredibly busy person. And I don't know how long this episode will be once I finish editing, but we are definitely over the 2-hour mark now. So Anna, thank you so much for coming on. Where can the people find you?
You can find me at my LSR on every single platform. I'm not very creative, so I just, stuck with the same one. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how anyone else would find this apart from through Tolkien Twitter, but I do like to say at the end, if you're a Tolkien fan, if you're just watching The Rings of Power, or if you just have like a casual Twitter account, come and join us on Tolkien Twitter. It's a lovely place to talk about theories and to just discuss how much we love the episodes with other Tolkien fans. It's a lovely place, and you should all come and say hello.
You should. That's quite right. What a lovely message to leave us with. Do come and join us on Tolkien Twitter. Do make an account. We're all friendly, and whichever character you find unquestionably hot, there will be other people to agree with you on that. So I don't think I could do a better advertisement than that. Thank you so much to Anna for joining me to break down this week's episode. It is so much more fun for me to talk about these episodes with a co-host, and I honestly couldn't ask for a nicer person to do that with than Anna. Let me know what you thought of our discussion on Twitter. Did Numenor impress you as much as it did us? How is Arondir going to get out of his tricky situation? And most importantly, who do you think Adar is going to be? And what does he do? I'd love to continue the discussion on Twitter, so come on over and join us. But for today, that's all we have time for. As always, I'd greatly appreciate if you could leave a rating or review on whichever podcast platform you use, and if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back later this week, hopefully, with my review of Episode 4 on the Daily Rings of Power podcast. Namarie.